So let's talk about the big controversy of the day, and that is the Breonna Taylor case. Breonna Taylor was a woman who was shot in her apartment by police officers. And there is a lot of outrage because today it was announced that the three officers involved in her death were cleared of any murder charges. And this is now leading to accusations of systematic racism and oppression, and that this is evidence that the entire system of the United States is racist, it's systematically racist, and it's just out to get black people. And there was a lot of talk about how these officers should be charged with first-degree murder, and of course, there are a lot of acrimonious cries that this should happen, that this still should happen, that these officers were just murderers, and that they are the imposers of a system of systemic racism against black people or whatever. So they were cleared of any murder charges, and really I'm not really surprised at all, because there really isn't a sufficient amount of evidence to substantiate any sort of claim of murder against these officers. So let's get right to some of the facts. For one, it is commonly stated that these officers used a no-knock warrant. In other words, they had a warrant for Breonna Taylor, and they just, without even knocking on the door, they just busted the door right open. And this woman had no idea who these people were, and her boyfriend freaked out, and he got a gun, and he shot he fired on the officers, and the officers killed her. And these officers are still murderers because, well, they should have announced that they were police officers. They just didn't even knock. They just opened the door, and that was it. They busted the door open, and they just, eventually shot this woman. For one, the officers initially were given a no-knock warrant, but that was later changed into a knock and announce warrant. In other words, they were required to knock on the door and announce that they were police officers. The police officers have emphatically affirmed that they did indeed announce that they were the police. There are a lot of articles saying that the neighbors have said that they never heard anyone say that they were police. They never heard any sort of cry or announcement that police officers were in front of the door. But the New York Times did an investigation, and they found out that there was indeed a neighbor who said, yeah, I heard these people say that they were police officers. I heard the announcement of police. So because they had that knock and announce warrant, and because we know that there is a neighbor who says emphatically that he did hear that these people said, these officers announced that they were police officers, it's quite obvious that these guys did say that, yes, that they were police officers. And it really goes contrary to the whole narrative that they just knocked open the door. They just busted the door right open, and this poor woman was shot. Another thing is that when the officers knocked on the door and announced that they were police, they waited for a substantial duration of time. In fact, one officer, Officer Mattingly, he said that they gave Breonna Taylor enough time to open up the door. They waited long enough that even a disabled person could have gotten up and opened up that door. That's how much time that they gave this woman. That's what the officers have recounted. And so no one was opening up the door. So the officers busted the door open. They busted the door open, and Breonna Taylor's boyfriend took a pistol out and opened fire on the officers. At that point, the officers returned fire. So this was an exchange of fire. This was a shootout. And in the midst of that shootout, Breonna Taylor was killed. This was not a murder. This was the case of someone who had a warrant out for her being killed in the midst of a shootout. It wasn't murder. In that context, in the context of the boyfriend opening fire on the officers had every right to return fire. The officers returned fire in an act of self-defense because they were being fired upon. Now, why was there a warrant out for Breonna Taylor? Well, 2 years ago, Breonna Taylor had a relationship with a known drug dealer by the name of Jamarcus Glover. And even after she broke up with Glover, she still maintained a friendship with him. And authorities investigated Breonna Taylor, and they believed that Breonna Taylor was using her apartment as a delivery destination for Glover's drugs. And there was a detective who investigated Taylor, and he said that he saw Glover enter Breonna Taylor's apartment and exit Breonna Taylor's apartment holding a box. And the detective believed that that box was full of drugs. So authorities believed that Taylor was working with Glover and helping him with his drug crimes, and that she was allowing Glover to use her address as a shipping point for his drugs. So that's why there was a warrant. The warrant was legitimate. It was legitimately issued. The officers went to her apartment. They knocked on the door and they announced that they were police officers. Nobody was opening up the door. They busted the door open. They were following policy. Boyfriend shoots at the officers. Now, we have reason to believe that the officers announced that they were indeed police officers. There was a neighbor who confirmed that the officers announced that they were indeed the police. So in that regard, we have a good enough reason to believe that the boyfriend knew that they were officers. So when they busted the door open and he starts shooting at them, they're going to fire. So this wasn't murder. Now, could this have been done better? Yeah, but this wasn't murder. And the left is making a huge deal about this, and they're trying to make it out that this is racism. You know what this is like? Remember Kate Steinle? She was a girl who was killed by a bullet that came from the result of an illegal immigrant holding a pistol and the pistol accidentally going off. And the conservatives were saying that this illegal immigrant should be charged with first-degree murder and that he obviously murdered Kate Steinle. He shot her in cold blood. When the reality was that, well, the illegal immigrant actually was like 70-something feet away from Kate Steinle. He found a pistol underneath a bench somewhere, and the pistol belonged to a federal agent. How the pistol got there, we have no idea. It's a very strange story. But it played so conveniently well for Donald Trump's narrative against immigration. But, you know, the illegal immigrant found the pistol under a bench. He was, you know, playing around with it, and boom, the pistol accidentally discharged, and the bullet flew and hit a pillar and then ricocheted off and managed to hit Kate Steinle directly dozens and dozens of feet away from where the bullet ricocheted. And Kate Steinle died. And the conservatives were saying this was murder, and this illegal immigrant murdered this beautiful girl in cold blood, and they couldn't prove it. And the right-wingers were still pissed off about it. Well, this is like the left-wing version of that story. So the left loves to focus on the police, the right loves to focus on illegal immigrants. So what we're seeing is just the result of the typical right versus left narrative producing scenario. Like, that's what we're seeing right now. So anyway, yeah, thought I would give you guys that information. Hope you guys have learned something from this video. God bless.